Immediately claiming central space with the queen pawn sets up a fight for the board's heart. Challenging white's central pawn, black immediately establishes an equal footing and prepares to develop pieces harmoniously. Challenging black's central foothold immediately, this pawn thrust injects dynamism and seeks to control more territory. Solidifying the d5 pawn paves the way for piece development, though it restricts the queen's bishop for now. Developing the knight now aims to solidify central control and prepare for castling, keeping options open for further pawn advances or piece play. Solidifying the central pawn structure, black prepares to support the d5 pawn and potentially challenge white's space with a timely dxc4. Solidifying the center's pawn structure while preparing to develop the bishop looks like white's quiet, yet firm, intent. Developing the knight here opens up avenues for queenside expansion and prepares to castle, solidifying black's central presence. Developing the knight to its most active square naturally prepares for kingside castling and solidifies central control. Solidifying the pawn chain and preparing for queenside expansion, this knight subtly shores up weaknesses and eyes better squares. Developing the bishop here prepares to castle and eyes the kingside. Relinquishing the central pawn offers space, but potentially a cramped queenside for black if white recaptures effectively. Recapturing the pawn opens diagonals for the queen and bishop, reinforcing central control. This pawn thrust aims to gain queenside space and dislodge white's bishop. Regaining the bishop to a central square enhances piece coordination, preparing for future pawn breaks and potential queenside pressure. Developing the bishop to a more active diagonal, preparing to castle and eyeing the queenside expansion. Pushing the pawn forward aggressively stakes central territory and opens diagonals for your pieces, creating immediate attacking prospects. Propelling the queenside pawn ignites a pawn storm, seizing crucial central space and immediately challenging white's central control. Inviting queenside expansion, this knight detour gambits tempo for future pawn breaks. Liberating the queenside pawn structure, but potentially weakening the queenside pawn chain in the process. Pushing the pawn aggressively opens lines, but weakens the king's pawn shield considerably. This pawn thrust creates an immediate tactical crossroads, challenging white's knight and potentially disrupting white's central pawn structure. Securing the monarch is paramount, initiating a strategic repositioning to embrace safety amidst the queenside pawn surge. Freeing the d-pawn and reinforcing the center, black initiates a strategic exchange, aiming to disrupt white's pawn chain and open lines for active piece play. Rerouting the rook offers crucial central influence and prepares for potential pawn breaks. Gaining queenside space with pawn advances like g6 is often a double-edged sword, potentially creating weaknesses around the king. Sharpening the kingside pressure, this piece repositions to eye dark squares and potentially provoke weaknesses in black's pawn structure. Challenging the queen's position creates immediate counterplay and disrupts white's pawn structure. Liberating the knight from its wing allows for a more dynamic presence in the center, potentially disrupting black's pawn structure. Black aims to reinforce the d5 pawn and prevent white's knight from reaching the favorable c6 square. Initiating a queenside pawn storm to seize territory. Opening the queenside pawn structure invites further complications on the open queenside. Opening the queenside now presents immediate tactical opportunities and challenges for both sides as piece activity intensifies. Developing the bishop here prepares for a potential queenside pawn push and frees up the f8 square for the rook. Prioritizing piece development, white repositions the bishop to a more active diagonal, aiming to bolster the queenside and prepare for potential central advances. Shifting the queen back clears the d-file, aiming to contest central space and prepare for piece activity. Asserting dominion over the b-file now aims to dismantle black's queenside structure. Securing the rook to the open file, preparing for a pawn push or to challenge the central tension. Unleashing the rook seizes the crucial open file, a bold gamble for positional initiative. Sacrificing the exchange, black opens the b-file hoping for counterplay, but this gambit leaves the king exposed. Sacrificing the bishop to shatter black's queenside pawn structure and open lines is a bold gambit, creating immediate tactical complications. This squares the queen, avoiding the immediate threat and preparing to contest the open a file. Exploiting the doubled pawns, white claims a valuable exchange, simplifying into a more favorable endgame. Now that the central tension is resolved, black must focus on coordinating their pieces for the coming endgame, avoiding any isolated pawns. Securing the queenside pawn majority and eyeing black's vulnerable king. A daring pawn grab, creating immediate tactical complexities and forcing white to defend his newly acquired material while black aims for active piece play. Clearing the file unlocks a potential queenside invasion, creating immediate pressure. The black queen redeems itself, seizing the open file and threatening immediate counterplay against white's exposed king. Disrupting the pawn chain, white opens a diagonal for the bishop and pressures the queenside infrastructure. Sensing tactical danger, black retreats the queen to a safer square, preserving material while anticipating further complications. Shielding the queen reveals a hidden threat on the kingside, aiming to dismantle black's defensive setup. Unblocking the bishop allows it to eye the weakened queenside squares and prepare for potential king safety maneuvers. Initiating a decisive clamp on black's queenside, this knight's outpost prepares to smother their counterplay. Sacrificing the bishop opens up the kingside for immediate threats. Securing the advantage, the knight reclaims its lost piece, simplifying into a winning endgame where its superior position will prove decisive. Seeking to contest the now open c-file, black aims to stabilize their position and potentially disrupt white's active pieces in this tense endgame. King Hunt initiation. The monarch faces immediate danger, forcing a critical defensive retreat. Trading off the bishop for the knight now resolves the central pawn tension, transitioning into an endgame where white enjoys a material advantage. Pawn advance opens the king's final defense and threatens queenside domination. Reuniting the king with his troops offers a vital moment of safety amidst the otherwise exposed queenside. Asserting control of the open a file, this rook aims to penetrate black's position and exploit weaknesses. Activating the knight towards the center here prepares for potential pawn breaks. Invigorating the knight's position, this maneuver aims to seize control of the file and disrupt black's rook. A necessary retreat to preserve the knight's influence. Shifting the knight aggressively to the queenside aims to pressure black's weak pawns and control the critical 7th rank. A strategic retreat, repositioning the knight to prepare for counterplay and solidify the pawn structure. Solidifying the knight's central outpost promises to restrict black's development and pave the way for an attacking breakthrough. Stepping back to prepare the knight's redeployment after this exchange offers a solid positional foundation. Knight finds a potent outpost, eyeing critical squares and disrupting black's developing plans. Reclaiming the initiative, the knight aims to disrupt white's centralized pawn chain and prepare for a more active role. This rook pivot prepares to pressure the weakened queenside, aiming to exploit the isolated knight. Securing the king's safety is paramount. A swift regrouping to a more protected square allows for a better defensive structure. Securing the queenside while preventing immediate counterplay, this vigilant repositioning prepares for potential central pawn advances. Seeking respite from the knight's pressure, the rook endeavors to secure the 8th rank. Dominating the open file secures vital space and prepares for infiltration. A belated maneuver of the knight, hoping to disrupt white's rook control over their file, but it feels a touch too slow. The knight reclaims an outpost, preparing to harass the d7 pawn and gain central influence. A quiet repositioning of the rook, aiming to contest the open b-file and prepare for further pawn advances. Repositioning the knight to a3 opens the central file and prepares to support a future pawn push on the queenside. Reactivating the knight toward the kingside offers a chance to disrupt white's coordinated pieces. Repositioning the knight aims to secure better control of the center and prepare a breakthrough. Re-establishing the knight's presence on the queen side, the black knight prepares to disrupt white's control over the c-file. The rook advances to the 7th rank, aiming to sever the opponent's pawn structure. Securing the knight's central outposts while improving rook activity on the open file promises a strategic advantage. Challenging the knight's outpost and eyeing the central pawn push. Stepping away from the immediate danger, the king seeks a slightly safer square amidst the queenside pressure. Preparing to activate the king, aiming for better central control and supporting the queenside advance. Prioritizing king's safety is paramount now, as the monarch ventures out into the open. Refocusing the knight to d2 seeks to improve its scope, potentially supporting a c4-c5 pawn push or preparing a knight sortie to f3. Shifting the knight to the outpost offers a strong defensive presence and prepares for potential breaks. Unleashing the knight to fork, aiming to disrupt black's knight and pawn structure decisively. Relocating the king to the 7th rank secures it from further pawn advances and prepares for central activity. A strategic king repositioning to activate its defensive and offensive potential in the evolving pawn structure. Shifting the pawn allows the knight to potentially reposition, reinforcing the pawn structure against future advances. Initiating a kingside pawn thrust to disrupt black's blockade and potentially open lines for the white king. Seizing initiative with a knight fork, this aggressive maneuver disrupts white's king's safety and aims to unwind black's scattered forces. Consolidating the king forward now, aiming to support the knight's advance. Unleashing the central pawn is a bold bid for dynamism, aiming to disrupt white's tightly packed pieces and open fresh avenues. Pawns become unstoppable monsters when supported. Forcing the king to the side offers a potential escape route, but also exposes it to further harassment on the open file. Relocating the king to safety allows for future pawn pushes and rook activation. Relocating the rook to the open file presents immediate attacking potential against white's king. Clearing the knight from this pinned diagonal offers new attacking avenues down the c-file. Repositioning the knight to a more active square near the center to potentially disrupt white's pawn structure is the primary idea. Exploiting the pinned knight, this check forces black into a less favorable defensive posture.